The wedding hall shimmered with soft golden lights that reflected off crystal glasses and white satin tablecloths. Laughter filled the air as guests enjoyed the evening, chatting about the couple's love story and the lavish decorations that surrounded them. The scent of roses and baked bread mixed gently in the air, while a band played a light tune in the background. It was a perfect evening for celebration. Among the many faces that smiled and toasted, one young woman moved quietly between the tables, carrying trays of sparkling water and desserts. Her name was Lena, one of the servers hired for the night. She wore a simple black uniform, her hair tied neatly back. She didn't speak much, but there was a calm kindness in her eyes that people noticed even if they didn't mention it. She worked carefully, trying to avoid spilling a single drop, her movements graceful but cautious. Lena had been working in catering for a few years now. It wasn't what she had dreamed of doing, but it helped pay the bills. Each wedding was different, but the pattern was always the same. Joy all around while she watched from the side, serving others quietly. She didn't mind, though sometimes a small ache grew inside her chest, the kind that comes when you see a life full of music and dreams passing by while you're too busy just getting by. The grand piano in the corner caught her attention every time she passed by. It was white and shining, almost untouched since the evening began. The pianist who was supposed to play during dinner had stepped out for a while, and the piano sat there almost calling out softly. Lena's eyes lingered on it for a moment before she turned away again. She didn't dare let herself think about it too much. That part of her life felt like another world. She stopped at a table near the dance floor where a group of guests were laughing loudly. One of them, a man in his 50s with silver hair and an expensive suit, was telling jokes to a small crowd. He had the kind of voice that filled the room, the kind people listened to whether they wanted to or not. As Lena placed a glass of water in front of him, he noticed her looking toward the piano. "Hey there," he said suddenly, loud enough for others to hear. "You like the piano, do you?" Lena froze for a second, caught off guard. It's beautiful," she replied softly, trying to smile and move away, but he wasn't done. "You should play something for us then," he said with a laugh, turning to the others at the table. "What do you think, folks? Let the young lady play us a song." The guests chuckled, thinking it was just a joke. One of the women smiled politely and said, "Oh, come on, let her work." But the man waved his hand, clearly enjoying the attention. No, I'm serious. There's a piano right there. Maybe she's got some hidden talent." Lena's face turned red. She shook her head quickly, her hands gripping the tray a little tighter. "Oh, no, sir, I can't. I'm just serving tonight," she said quietly, trying to keep her voice steady. But the man wouldn't stop. "Ah, come on. What's the harm in one song? You're part of the celebration too, right?" he said in a teasing tone. The people at the table looked from him to Lena, unsure what to say. Some smiled awkwardly. Others just stayed quiet, not wanting to get involved. Across the room, the bride overheard the conversation. She was sitting with her new husband, still glowing with joy from the day's ceremony. Seeing the situation, she stood and walked over with a warm smile. "What's happening here?" she asked kindly. "Oh, nothing," the man said with a smirk. "Just asking our lovely server here to give us a tune." She was eyeing that piano. The bride looked at Lena with gentle eyes. "Can you play?" she asked softly. Lena hesitated. "I used to, a little," she admitted, her voice almost a whisper. "But it's been a long time." The bride's smile grew warmer. "Then maybe tonight's the perfect time to try again. Don't worry, this is a friendly crowd." The crowd nearby had gone quiet, curious now. All eyes seemed to fall on her. Lena's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to sink into the floor. She wasn't sure what scared her more, playing after all these years or embarrassing herself in front of everyone. "I really shouldn't," she began, but the bride gently touched her arm. "Only if you want to," she said softly. "No pressure at all." Lena nodded weakly, feeling trapped between fear and something else and a tiny spark inside her that she thought had died long ago. She took a deep breath. "Just for a moment," she said quietly. The man chuckled, clearly thinking it would be nothing special. "All right then, let's hear it," he said, raising his glass as if ready for a joke performance. Lena set her tray down on the side table and slowly walked toward the piano. The hall grew quieter with every step she took. The band in the corner stopped their light chatter. Even the waiters paused for a moment. She could hear the soft clicking of her shoes on the marble floor. The piano seemed even larger up close, its surface shining under the chandelier light. She reached out and touched the smooth ivory keys, her fingers trembling slightly. For a second, she just stood there, lost in a rush of memories. She remembered being a little girl, sitting beside her mother on an old upright piano that had a few broken keys. Her mother's hands had guided hers, teaching her notes, teaching her to feel the music instead of just playing it. She remembered the joy it gave her, how she'd play for hours dreaming of big stages and bright lights. But those dreams had faded after her mother passed away. Life had become about work, rent, and survival. The piano had stayed silent since then. The guests watched in silence. Some looked amused, others curious. The older man leaned back in his chair, a smug smile on his face. He whispered something to the man beside him, and they both chuckled softly, not expecting much. Lena's fingers rested on the keys. She pressed one softly, and a single note that echoed through the room like a whisper. It was soft, almost hesitant. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and tried again, letting her fingers move gently over the piano. Just a few simple notes, she told herself. Just to get through this moment. The sound that came out was shaky at first, uneven, but there was something delicate about it. She moved slowly, almost like she was remembering how to breathe through the music. The noise of the crowd faded in her ears. For a moment, it was just her and the piano. She played a small, familiar melody, one she had learned long ago from her mother. Her fingers found the rhythm again, growing steadier with every note. The melody floated softly through the air, filling the hall like a warm breeze. Conversations that had started again suddenly stopped. People turned their heads listening. The older man's grin began to fade. The woman sitting beside him leaned forward, eyes wide. The music grew stronger, more confident. Lena's hands moved gracefully now, as if the years without practice had never existed. The song was not flashy or loud. It was simple, emotional, and full of quiet beauty. In that moment, everything around her disappeared. She wasn't a server anymore. She wasn't worried about spilled drinks or tired feet. She was just a girl who loved music, who had once dreamed of making people feel something real, and that's exactly what she did. When the last note faded into silence, she opened her eyes and realized the whole hall was watching. For a second, no one spoke. The air was still, almost heavy with surprise. Then someone clapped. Then another. Within seconds, the entire room filled with applause. Lena's heart raced. She didn't know what to do. She smiled shyly and stood up from the piano, bowing her head slightly. Her cheeks were red, her hands shaking, but for the first time in years, she felt alive. The bride approached her again, her eyes shining with emotion. "That was beautiful," she said softly. "Truly beautiful." "Thank you," Lena whispered. "I didn't think I'd ever play again." The older man stood up too, though he looked a little embarrassed now. "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "I didn't expect that." There was an awkward chuckle around the table, but Lena only smiled politely and went back to her tray. She didn't play to prove anyone wrong. She just wanted to remember how it felt to be herself again. As she returned to work, the mood in the room had changed. People were still talking about her performance, whispering in wonder, asking the bride who she was. But Lena didn't listen. She simply kept serving quietly, though this time her steps felt lighter. Inside her heart, something had shifted, like a door she thought was closed forever had just opened again. After Lena finished playing, the wedding hall slowly returned to its cheerful noise. But something in the air felt different. It was softer, calmer, as if the music had left a warm echo behind. Guests were smiling, talking quietly about what they'd just witnessed. Some said they had never heard something so emotional before. Others wondered why someone with such talent was serving food at a wedding instead of performing on a stage. Lena tried not to hear those whispers as she picked up her tray again. Her heart was still beating fast. She kept telling herself it was nothing, that she just played a simple tune. But deep inside, she knew it was more than that. For the first time in a long time, she had let a part of herself out that she had been hiding for years. The bride and groom thanked her again as she passed their table. The groom smiled and said, "You made the evening even more special. That was pure magic." Lena nodded shyly, not knowing how to respond. She didn't feel like she deserved such words. When she walked back to the kitchen area, one of her co-workers, a friendly older woman named Clara, looked at her with wide eyes. "I had no idea you could play like that," she whispered. "Everyone's talking about you. Lena smiled faintly. I didn't plan to, she said softly. It just happened. Well, you sure gave everyone something to remember, Clara said with a grin. Even the chef stopped for a minute to listen. That's saying something. Lena laughed quietly. For a while she forgot the exhaustion from the long day. Even though her uniform was still wrinkled and her feet hurt, she felt lighter inside, almost like she was floating. But not everyone was as cheerful. At the corner table, the man who had teased her earlier sat quietly, sipping his drink. His confident smile was gone. He watched her from across the room, lost in thought. He had expected a clumsy, awkward attempt at music, maybe even a laugh for the night. Instead, he'd witnessed something that touched everyone in the room, something real. He stood up and made his way toward her. Lena noticed him coming and instinctively stepped back, unsure of what he would say. He stopped near her, clearing his throat. Miss, he began, his voice a little softer than before. About earlier, I might have gone too far, she smiled politely. It's all right, sir. You didn't mean any harm. No, I did, he admitted, surprising her. I was being arrogant. I thought I was just making a joke. I didn't expect... He paused, struggling for words. Well, you have a gift. I haven't heard music like that in years. Lena blinked, unsure what to say. Thank you, she said quietly. I used to play. My mother taught me when I was little. She must have been a great teacher, he said. Then after a pause, he added, You should never have stopped. His words stayed with her long after he returned to his table. As the night went on, the event slowly wound down. Guests began to leave, laughing and hugging the couple goodbye. The band packed up their instruments and the staff started clearing tables. The hall looked less glamorous now, just a big empty room full of half-finished glasses and fading flowers. Lena stayed late to help clean up. She wiped tables, stacked chairs, and folded napkins. But every few minutes her eyes wandered to the piano again. It sat quietly now, but she could still feel its presence, like it was waiting for her to come back. When most of the staff had left, Lena finally sat on a chair near the stage, taking a short break. Her hands still tingled from playing. She smiled faintly, remembering the faces of people as they listened. The silence, the surprise, the emotion. She didn't realize the wedding photographer was still around until he came up to her. He had a kind face and held his camera loosely in one hand. You know, he said, I took a few pictures when you were playing. Oh, she said, startled. You did? Yeah. The light was perfect and the whole room looked like it froze for that moment. You should see it. You look completely lost in the music, Lena laughed shyly. I'd probably look silly. Not at all, he said, smiling. You looked alive. She didn't know why, but those words struck her deeply. Alive. She hadn't felt that in years. The next morning, Lena woke up earlier than usual. Her small apartment was quiet, filled with soft light from the window. On the counter sat a note she had written years ago, tucked under a stack of unpaid bills. It said, One day, play again. She had written it on her mother's birthday and promised herself to honor her memory through music. But life had pulled her in another direction, and that paper had become nothing more than a forgotten wish. She picked it up now, holding it between her fingers. Something inside her stirred, a mix of longing and courage. She didn't know what that night had awakened, but she couldn't ignore it anymore. That afternoon, while taking a walk, she passed by a small music store downtown. She paused in front of the window. Inside there were rows of shiny instruments, guitars, violins, and pianos. The sight brought back a rush of memories. She stepped inside almost without thinking. The shop smelled like polished wood and old paper. Behind the counter stood a friendly-looking man tuning a guitar. He smiled when he saw her. Looking for something in particular? He asked. I used to play the piano, she said softly. I just wanted to look. He nodded knowingly. Once a pianist, always a pianist, he said. Doesn't go away, you know. Just hides for a while. Lena smiled. That's exactly how it feels. She ran her fingers along the edge of a digital keyboard displayed on the wall. It wasn't the grand piano from the wedding, but it was beautiful in its own way. She pressed a single key, and the soft note echoed around the shop. The man behind the counter said, We rent instruments too, if you just want to play again for a while. She hesitated for a long moment, then nodded. Maybe I'll do that, she said quietly. That evening, she brought the small keyboard home. She set it up near the window and sat down in front of it, just like she used to. Her fingers hovered above the keys. The city lights twinkled outside and she could hear the faint hum of traffic below. When she finally started to play, the sound filled her apartment, gentle and imperfect but beautiful in its honesty. Her neighbor, a young mother, knocked softly after a few minutes. "Sorry," she said with a smile. "I heard music." "It's really lovely," Lena apologized quickly. "Oh, I didn't mean to bother you." "Not at all," the woman said. "It's nice hearing something peaceful for a change." That night, Lena played until her hands ached. She wasn't trying to be perfect. She was just letting herself feel again. Each note was like a breath she had been holding for years. Days turned into weeks. Lena went back to work as usual, but something about her was different. She smiled more. She moved with a lightness that others noticed. Sometimes when things were slow, she found herself humming little tunes while serving guests. One afternoon, a letter arrived at the hotel where she worked. It was addressed to her. She opened it carefully, and inside was a short note that made her heart skip. It was from the groom's father who had been at the wedding. He was the head of a local music foundation that supported young artists. The letter said, "Your music moved everyone that night. If you ever wish to perform again, our door is open. Please contact us." Lena read the letter over and over, unable to believe it. Her hands trembled slightly as she held it close. She didn't know what she would do yet. But for the first time, the future didn't look like a blur of long shifts and tired nights. It looked full of possibility. That evening, as the sun went down, Lena walked to the park near her apartment. The air was cool, and the sky was painted with orange and pink. She sat on a bench, thinking about how one small moment, a teasing comment, a simple song, had changed everything. Sometimes life didn't open doors gently. It pushed them open when you least expected it. She smiled to herself, whispering softly, "Maybe that's what my mother wanted all along, for me to find my way back." The memory of the wedding, the music, and the faces of the people who listened stayed with her like a quiet melody that never truly faded. And though she didn't know what was waiting ahead, she felt ready to find out. Lena sat on her small balcony, holding the letter from the Music Foundation again. She had read it so many times that the edges had begun to curl. Every time she looked at those words, she felt the same mixture of excitement and fear. The idea of playing again, not just in her apartment but in front of real people, made her heart beat faster. It had been years since she performed for anyone. That night at the wedding had been pure chance, a moment she didn't plan, and yet it had changed everything. Now someone actually wanted to hear her play again. It didn't seem real. She looked down at her hands. They weren't the same as before. The calluses from lifting trays and cleaning dishes had replaced the soft skin of a pianist. She wondered if her fingers could still move across the keys the way they once did. When she told Clara about the letter, her friend almost dropped the glass she was polishing. "Are you serious?" she asked, her eyes wide. "They want you to perform?" "That's what it says," Lena said with a small smile. "But I don't know if I can do it." "Why not?" Clara asked. "You played beautifully at the wedding." Everyone was stunned. "That was different," Lena said softly. "I wasn't thinking that night. I just played. But if I go and perform again, people will expect something special. What if I disappoint them?" Clara placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Listen, sometimes life gives us a moment we don't expect. You can either walk away or grab it. I think you should grab it." Lena smiled, but deep inside her fear was stronger than her hope. Still, that night she sat down at her little keyboard again and began to play. Her fingers stumbled at first, but the notes slowly found their way. She practiced the same song from the wedding over and over until it felt natural again. Then she tried new melodies, things she had written long ago but never finished. Music began to fill her apartment every evening. Neighbors sometimes paused outside her door just to listen. Children in the building whispered about the lady who plays the piano upstairs. It made her blush, but it also gave her a quiet sense of joy. One afternoon, she finally gathered the courage to call the number from the letter. Her voice trembled as she spoke to the woman on the other end. "Ah, yes," the woman said warmly. "We've been hoping to hear from you. The director was deeply moved by your performance at the wedding. He said it reminded him of why he fell in love with music in the first place." Lena's breath caught. "That's very kind," she said softly. "We have a small charity concert next month," the woman continued. "It's not a big event, just local musicians, teachers, and students. But it's a wonderful place to share your music. Would you consider performing one piece? There was a long silence before Lena finally said, "Yes, I think I would." When she hung up, she sat quietly for a while, letting the moment sink in. She had just agreed to perform again, after years of silence. The thought terrified her, but somewhere inside she felt her mother's voice whispering, "You can do this." Over the next few weeks, her life followed a new rhythm. She still worked at the hotel, but every spare moment was spent at the keyboard. Sometimes she played until midnight, losing track of time completely. Her neighbors no longer knocked to ask her to stop. Instead, they listened. Even the young mother next door told her, "Your music makes the evenings feel softer." Lena smiled every time she heard that. Music had once been her language of comfort, and now it was connecting her to others again. A few days before the concert, she received another letter from the foundation with detail: the venue, the date, the time. It would be held at a small concert hall downtown. She wasn't the main performer, just one of several people invited to share their talent. That made her feel a little better. Still, every time she thought about walking onto that stage, her stomach tightened. The night before the performance, she couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker below. Her fingers moved nervously against her lap. She thought about everything that had led her here: her mother's lessons, the wedding, the letter, and the courage it took to say yes. Early the next morning, she put on her best dress, simple but elegant, and tied her hair back neatly. She looked in the mirror and barely recognized herself. There was a spark in her eyes again, something she hadn't seen in years. When she arrived at the concert hall, her heart raced as she saw the stage. The piano sat under a single light, waiting. A few people were setting up chairs and tuning instruments. The sound of music filled the air, violins warming up, soft chatter, footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. A young man greeted her at the door. "You must be Lena," he said kindly. "We're so glad you came. You'll be the third performer tonight. The audience is mostly families and supporters, and it's a very warm crowd." She nodded, her throat dry. "Thank you," she whispered. When the concert began, she sat backstage listening to the others. The first performer was a teenage boy playing the violin. He was nervous too, but when he finished, the crowd cheered. The next was a choir of children who sang sweetly, filling the hall with their clear voices. Then it was her turn. Her hands felt cold as she walked onto the stage. The bright lights made her blink, and for a second she wanted to run. But then she saw the piano, its polished surface reflecting the soft glow of the lamps. It was as if it was waiting just for her. She took a deep breath, sat down, and let her fingers touch the keys. The moment she played the first note, all her fear began to fade. The melody she chose was one she had written herself, a quiet piece full of longing and hope. It began softly, almost like a whisper, then grew stronger as it went on. Every note carried her story, the years she had lost, the struggles she had faced, and the dream she was reclaiming. The audience listened in complete silence. Even the children stopped fidgeting. The sound of her music filled every corner of the hall, delicate but full of emotion. Some people closed their eyes, others leaned forward, drawn in by the honesty of her playing. When she reached the final note, she let it linger, then slowly lifted her hands from the keys. The hall stayed quiet for a heartbeat before the applause began. It was soft at first, then grew louder, filling the room. Lena stood and bowed slightly, her eyes shining with tears. She didn't care about being perfect. She just cared that she played with her heart. After the concert, several people came up to her. A woman told her she reminded her of her daughter, who used to play before she got sick. A man said her music made him think of home. Someone even asked if she had ever recorded her songs. Lena thanked them all, overwhelmed. For the first time, she felt like she belonged, not just as a server who worked quietly in the background, but as someone who could touch hearts. When she finally left the hall that night, the air outside felt cool and fresh. She walked slowly, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement. She couldn't stop smiling. Her phone buzzed with a message from Clara. "How did it go?" Lena typed back, "Better than I could have dreamed." When she got home, she sat at her keyboard again. Her hands moved effortlessly, playing a soft tune that came from somewhere deep inside her. It wasn't a song she knew. It was something new, something that felt like the next chapter of her story. She realized then that music wasn't just something she did. It was who she was. And no matter how long she had stayed away, it had never left her. The wedding night had been a moment of chance. But maybe it was also fate, a reminder that sometimes the smallest moments can change everything. As she finished playing, she looked out the window at the stars. She whispered softly, "Thank you," not sure if she was speaking to her mother, the universe, or the music itself. What mattered most was that she had found her way back. The morning after the concert, Lena woke up before sunrise. Her small apartment was filled with a quiet stillness, the kind that follows a meaningful day. She sat up in bed, blinking at the faint light coming through the curtains. The memory of last night returned slowly. The soft applause, the smiles, the faces that had listened so carefully. It didn't feel real yet. She walked to the kitchen and made herself a cup of tea. Her hand still felt light, like the music had left something glowing inside her. She sat by the window, sipping slowly, thinking about everything that had happened in the past few months. It all started with one small moment. That night at the wedding when she was just doing her job. One teasing comment had somehow opened a door she didn't know still existed. As she looked outside at the quiet street, her phone buzzed. It was a message from the Music Foundation. "Thank you for your beautiful performance last night. The audience loved you. We'd be honored to have you join our next event." Lena read it twice, hardly believing it. She smiled softly, her heart swelling with a mixture of joy and disbelief. She wasn't used to people noticing her like this. For so long she had been invisible, another face in the crowd, another pair of hands serving others. Now suddenly people were asking for her music. At work that day, Clara was waiting for her near the kitchen. The moment Lena walked in, she rushed forward with excitement.
"Tell me everything."
"How did it go?" "It went better than I could have imagined," Lena said, still smiling. "They even asked me to play again." Clara clapped her hands together. "I knew it. I told you something good would come from that night." "I'm so proud of you." "Thank you," Lena said softly. "I was terrified, but when I started playing, it felt like I was finally where I belonged." The rest of the day passed in a blur. Even the long hours and heavy trays didn't feel so tiring anymore. There was something new in her step, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. Some of the other servers noticed too. One of them said jokingly, "You look like someone who won the lottery." Lena laughed. "Maybe I did," she said. "Just not the kind you can spend." That evening, after her shift ended, she stopped by the same music shop she had visited before. The man behind the counter recognized her right away. "Back again?" he asked with a smile. "Yes," she said, running her fingers along the keys of a piano on display. "I wanted to thank you. If you hadn't told me about the rentals, I probably wouldn't have started playing again." He smiled warmly. "I'm glad to hear that. You know, music always finds its way back to those who love it. What's next for you?" "I've been invited to play again," she said softly. "A bigger event this time." "That's wonderful," he said. "Maybe it's time to think about getting your own piano, don't you think?" She laughed lightly. "Maybe one day." Before she left, he handed her a small notebook. "Here," he said. "Write your songs in this. Every musician needs a place to keep their music safe." She held the notebook carefully, feeling the smooth cover under her fingertips. "Thank you," she said sincerely. When she got home that night, she sat by her keyboard and began writing in the notebook. At first, she just wrote small pieces, half melodies, bits of lyrics, memories that turned into notes. It became her quiet ritual every night. Weeks passed, and the foundation reached out again with more opportunities. One performance led to another. Sometimes she played at small gatherings, sometimes in local cafes. Each time she met new people who told her how her music made them feel. An older woman once told her that her song reminded her of her late husband. A young man said it gave him courage to follow his dream of painting again. Every story touched Lena deeply. She realized that her music wasn't just about her anymore. It was about connection. It was about giving something to others the same way her mother's songs once gave her comfort. But even with the growing recognition, Lena never changed. She still worked at the hotel during the day. She still smiled at every guest and carried her trays with care. But now some guests recognized her from her performances. One evening, a woman approached her with a bright smile and said, You're the pianist from the concert last month, aren't you? Lena blushed. Yes, that's me. The woman's eyes sparkled. Your music was beautiful. You made everyone in that hall cry, in the best way possible. Lena thanked her quietly, humbled by the kindness. She still found it hard to believe that her music could move people like that. One evening, after finishing a late shift, she sat down at her keyboard, exhausted but restless. She opened the notebook the shopkeeper had given her. It was filled now with ideas, half-written melodies and lines of music that had come to her at random moments. As she played, she began to shape a new song, one that told her story from the beginning. The long years of struggle, the silence, the rediscovery, the hope. It was gentle and haunting, but full of strength. She called it the wedding song, because everything had started there. A month later, the Music Foundation invited her to perform at a charity gala. This event would be bigger than any she had done before. The director himself called her to say, "We'd love for you to close the evening with your own composition." Lena hesitated. "My own?" she asked, nervous. "Yes," he said. "Your story has inspired many people. You should share a piece that comes from your heart." When the night of the gala came, Lena felt her old nervousness return. The hall was larger, the lights brighter, and the audience bigger than anything she had ever faced. She waited backstage, clutching the small notebook in her hands. A man from the foundation noticed her nervousness and said kindly, "Just remember, they're here to feel your music, not to judge you." When her name was announced, Lena walked slowly to the piano. The room fell silent. She sat down, took a deep breath, and began to play the wedding song. The melody started softly, like a whisper from the past. It carried memories of laughter, long nights, and quiet tears. As the song grew, the notes turned, stronger, brighter, like sunlight breaking through clouds. It was her story, told not in words but in sound. The audience listened in awe. Some smiled, some wiped tears from their eyes. Even the servers who moved quietly at the back stopped to listen. By the time she played the final note, there wasn't a sound in the hall except for the faint hum of the piano fading into silence. Then came the applause, long and heartfelt. People stood up clapping until her eyes filled with tears. She bowed her head, overwhelmed. After the performance, the director approached her. "That was incredible," he said softly. "You've given everyone something they'll never forget." "Thank you," she whispered. "That song means a lot to me." "It should," he said. "It's your life in music." Later that night, as she walked home, the city felt different. The streets glowed with soft light, and every sound around her seemed musical. She thought about her mother again, how she used to tell her, "Music is the voice of the soul. Even when you stop playing, it waits for you." She smiled at the thought. Maybe that was true. Music had waited for her patiently, quietly, until she was ready to listen again. When she reached home, she placed her notebook on the table and wrote a few more lines under the title, "The Wedding Song." Beneath it, she wrote, "For the night that brought me back to life." The clock ticked softly in the background as she looked out her window. The world outside seemed peaceful, almost magical. For years, she had believed her dreams were gone, that they had been left behind in the past. But now, she realized something important. Dreams never really disappear. They just wait for the right moment to return, often when you least expect it. As she sat there, the faint sound of the city mixed with her quiet humming. Her fingers tapped gently on the table as if the piano keys were still under them. And in that still moment, she knew her story wasn't over yet. It had only just begun. The next morning came quietly. Lena woke before her alarm, the faint light of dawn spilling through the thin curtains. For a moment she just lay there, unsure if last night had really happened. The applause, the smiles, the way the whole room had gone still when she finished playing. It all felt like a dream she wasn't ready to wake from. She sat up slowly, her muscles sore from the long shift, yet her heart lighter than it had been in years. She made tea, wrapping her hands around the warm cup, letting the steam brush her face. Outside, the street was calm. Only a few early risers moved about. She replayed the music in her mind, the way the keys had answered her touch like an old friend she'd almost forgotten. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A message from the wedding coordinator glowed on the screen. "Thank you for last night. Everyone was talking about your performance. The bride's father asked for your contact. He said you moved the whole room." Lena stared at the words, smiling in disbelief. For so long she'd worked in silence, unnoticed. Now people remembered. Her name, not because she served their tables, but because she played. At work that afternoon, the kitchen hummed with noise and chatter. Clara, her closest friend among the staff, spotted her the moment she stepped in. "There she is," Clara called out, waving a dish rag like a flag. "Our celebrity pianist." Lena laughed, blushing. "Oh, please, I just played one song." "One song that had half the guests crying," Clara teased. "Don't pretend it wasn't something special." "I'm still trying to believe it myself," Lena said. "Everything happened so fast." Clara handed her a tray of glasses. "You've got something rare, Lena. Don't hide it again." The rest of the shift passed in a blur of clinking plates and rushing footsteps, but Lena didn't mind the pace. Her body moved out of habit, while her thoughts drifted elsewhere, to the piano, the sound, the moment she'd found herself again. For the first time in years, she looked forward to what might come next. That evening, she stopped by the small music shop a few blocks from her apartment. The same gray-haired owner was behind the counter, humming softly to the radio. He looked up and smiled. "Ah, the young lady who plays like she's telling a story." She laughed. "You remembered." "How could I forget? Did the piano at the hotel survive your magic?" "It did," she said, grinning. "And I might be playing again soon. I wanted to thank you for letting me practice here before." The man waved a hand modestly. "Music belongs to everyone. You don't owe me thanks." He reached behind the counter and pulled out a small black notebook. "Here, for your melodies. Every musician needs somewhere to catch the ideas before they run away." She accepted it carefully, touched by the gesture. "Thank you. I'll fill it with something good." That night she sat at her keyboard and opened the notebook. The first page was blank, waiting. She began writing. Just a few scattered notes, half a tune that had followed her from the wedding. It felt like a whisper of something bigger, something that hadn't yet learned to speak. Weeks turned into a quiet routine. Work during the day, music at night. She didn't tell many people about the new invitations that started arriving. Small performances, community events, local fundraisers. Each time she played, her confidence grew a little more. The nervous tremble in her hands began to fade, replaced by calm focus. People started remembering her face, greeting her with warmth wherever she went. One evening after a show at a cafe, an elderly woman approached her table. "You played a song about longing," the woman said. "It made me think of my late husband." "Thank you for that." Lena's throat tightened. "I'm glad it meant something to you." The woman squeezed her hand gently. "Never stop. The world needs more hearts like yours." Moments like that became her quiet treasures. She wrote them, down in the back of her notebook, each person, each story, each kind word. They reminded her that her music had a life beyond her fingertips. Still, she never let go of her day job. The hotel needed her, and she needed the steadiness of it. Sometimes guests recognized her mid-shift. A woman once whispered, "You're the pianist from the reception, aren't you?" Lena nodded shyly, and the woman beamed. "You have no idea how you lifted that whole room." Lena carried those words like small lights inside her. They kept her going when exhaustion crept in. One rainy afternoon, she sat by her window watching drops slide down the glass, the sound of thunder distant but gentle. Her notebook lay open on the table. She started sketching a new piece, something softer than before, filled with hope and the faint ache of memory. Each note felt like a conversation between her past and present selves. When she finished, she stared at the page and whispered, The wedding song. That was what she'd call it, in honor of the night everything changed. A month later, she received an unexpected call from the Music Foundation that had organized one of her earlier performances. The director spoke with warm enthusiasm. "We're hosting a charity gala next month," he said. "We'd be honored if you'd play, and we'd love you to close the evening with an original piece." "My own song?" Lena asked, startled. "Yes," he replied. "Something from the heart." She hesitated, glancing at her notebook. "Then I think I know what to play." The night of the gala arrived quickly. The hall shimmered with light and soft conversation. Waiters moved gracefully between tables. From behind the curtain, Lena peeked out at the crowd. There were hundreds of faces, many unfamiliar. Her hands felt cold despite the warmth of the room. "You'll do great," one of the organizers whispered. "They're here to feel something. Just give them that." When her name was announced, Lena walked to the grand piano at center stage. The hall fell silent. She sat down, took a breath, and placed her hands on the keys. The first notes drifted out like the beginning of a story told in the quiet of evening. The melody carried pieces of her life, the weariness of long days, the loneliness of forgotten dreams, the joy of rediscovery. As the song grew, so did her confidence. The music swelled, filling the hall with something bright and alive. The final chord hung in the air before fading into stillness. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the applause began. Soft at first, then stronger until the entire audience was on their feet. Lena lowered her head, overwhelmed, tears shining in her eyes. Backstage afterward, the director approached her. "You've done something rare tonight," he said gently. "You reminded everyone what honesty sounds like." "Thank you," she whispered. "That song was my life." "Then keep living it," he replied, "and keep sharing it." Later, walking home beneath a sky scattered with clouds, Lena felt the cool night breeze on her face. The city lights glimmered like quiet stars reflected in puddles on the pavement. She thought of her mother's words from long ago, "Music never leaves you. It just waits until you're ready to listen again." She smiled through her tears. Maybe that was exactly what had happened. At home, she placed the notebook on her table, flipping to a blank page. Under the title, "The Wedding Song," she added a single line, "For the night that gave me back my voice." She closed the book and listened to the rain beginning again outside. Somewhere in the rhythm of the drops, she heard a promise that there were still more songs waiting, still more people to reach. For the first time in a long while, Lena didn't feel like she was chasing her dreams. She felt like she was living them, one quiet note at a time.